Good morning. My name is Michael Cunningham, and I'm with the World Affairs Council of Austin, and we're with our Global Scholars Diploma Program. And I want to give you an introduction to the session number 7 that we are going to record for you today. This is a very special session, and it'll be on our third day of giving information out on the importance of stopping racism. In the first 2 days, you were able to see moot courts, and you were able to see an ICC moot court. And today we're going to try to have a global debate over a very, very important topic. The topic that you will try to see is not only is important for many different reasons, but the most important part you probably look at would be the idea that we're going to produce both sides of an argument, and then I want you to make up your own mind. Unlike theories that were taught in the past where you have to learn that theory and everything is in that theory and you look through the lens of that theory, we're going to try to look at both sides of an issue and have you decide. Critical race theory, should it be banned from being taught or implemented in our schools? Welcome to session number 7. Critical race debate. We're going to look at the pro side first. What are the reasons the pro side say they should win today's round? We took this information from the Loyola University Anti-Racist Pedagogy Series, Introduction to Related Theory. The pro is based on these assumptions. We endeavor to move towards anti-racism in the classroom and as an institution. We must listen to the experiences of others. This session will not share specific skills or strategies. The session content is applicable to any instruction or instructor, regardless of the content that you teach. And this is the beginning, it's not certification. Okay, here you see how to become an anti-racist. There are 3 zones. You have the fear zone. You don't really want to try to do something. You have the learning zone, and then finally you go to the growth zone. Take a look at this and see. Working definitions for anti-racism. This is from a professor of criminology and justice and criminology and psychology. Has 3 components. A, control over allocating resources. B, influence to persuade. And C, to control people's time. Operates at 3 different levels: the systemic or institutional level, the interpersonal level, and the individual level. All 3 of these levels are intersecting. Racism. Scholars disagree on the definition of racism. Abraham Kendi, for example, prioritizes systematic basis in policies, whereas Robin DiAngelo prioritizes biases in the beliefs and interactions of white persons with the persons of color. This is in New Yorker 2019. Racism is people of color continue to receive systemic disadvantages and resources across societal institutions and within interpersonal exchanges due to policies, practices, and cultural ideologies, norms, and implicit standards that favor those who perceive as white. White supremacy. White people mostly control power in the major societal institutions: educational, financial, medical, media, political, artistic, religious, scientific, and set the ideal cultural standards. White people learn to exercise entitlement and race-based assumptions, consciously or unconsciously held, in their informal and formal interactions and decisions, which subordinate and exploit non-whites. C.W. Mills, 2003. Racism, white supremacy, and racial prejudice hide the uniqueness and differences among individuals within a racial group, are supported by racial stereotyping and implicit biases, and permeate the societal culture, are not limited to involve hate groups such as neo-Nazis or the KKK. Racial prejudice is enormous feelings, beliefs, and assumptions that result in marginalizing or excluding members of a racial group. White privilege. refers to many unearned and often unacknowledged benefits are perceived as white in a racist society. Whites do not recognize these benefits, which often reflect the hidden societal disadvantages of being white. Piggy McIntosh and Tim Wise. Anti-racism is a starting place. Anti-racism is an active, ongoing process identifying and eliminating racism by changing systems, organizational structures, policies and practices, and attitudes and behaviors. This is adopted from the NAC International Perspectives. Critical Race Theory and Whiteness Studies for Anti-Racist Pedagogy from the Loyola University in Chicago. CRT is a theoretical and interpretive field of inquiry that examines race, racism, and anti-Blackness across history, society, and cultural modes of expression. CRT attempts to understand how victims of systematic racism are affected by cultural perceptions of race and how they're able to present themselves to counter prejudice. Placing race at the center of the analysis, CRT scholars interrogate policies and practices to uncover ways in which racist ideologies, structures, and institutions create and maintain a racial inequality. CRT scholarship traces racism in America through slavery, Reconstruction, and the Jim Crow and Civil Rights Movement and recent events. In doing so, it draws from the work of writers like Sojourner Truth, Frederick Douglass, W.E.B. Du Bois, Martin Luther King Jr., and others studying law, feminism, and post-structuralism. Critical race theory in the classroom. CRT perspective focuses on acknowledged and epistemic processes. It interrogates and aims to disrupt ideologies of racism. It works at a level of curricular offering, exposing students to cultural and racially relevant texts and practices. It uses textual close reading and deconstruction as critical practices that reveal ideological biases. Whiteness studies. Whiteness studies is a field of inquiry that investigates how dominant economic, political, social, and cultural structures, as well as actions and beliefs, systematize and perpetuate unequal distribution of privileges, resources, and powers between white people and people of color. Whiteness studies scholars argue that whiteness is a specific dimension of racism that elevates white people over people of color. Whiteness is a location of structural advantage of race, privilege, and a standpoint from which white people look at themselves and others. Frankenberg, 1993. For scholars of whiteness studies, racism is not only about discrete and isolated behavior and instances of racial discrimination, but it's also a social process in which we all place. Frankenberg and Morrison. One of the findings of whiteness studies is that whiteness presents itself as transparent or invisible because it is considered universal. It is often unnamed and unmarked. White people are just people. Because of their insulated environment of racial privilege, and when confronted with dealing with races, white people exhibit defensive reaction in order to protect themselves from a race-based stress, anger, fear, guilt, silence, etc. The reaction ultimately contributes to reinstate the white racial equilibrium. D'Angelo, White Fragility, 2011. Whiteness studies in the classroom. Anti-racist pedagogy on whiteness studies focus primarily on white students. It is based on the premise that white racism is ultimately a white problem and burden for interrupting it belongs to white people. It takes as its goal raising awareness among white students of their racial privileges in order to enable them to work for social justice and become anti-racist agents of change. Problem with white racist studies and anti-racist education. It gauges success by extent in which white students develop awareness of racism, but has sidelined the students of color. Blackwell, 2010. CRT plus whiteness studies in the classroom. Recommendations. Classroom discussion should focus on colorblindness, denial of race, and conflating of the races, class, gender discrimination that makes race invisible. Adoption of Black feminist standpoint. Allow Black students, women of color, to learn using their own standpoint experiences and practices. Engagement of students of color uses stories and experiences as a site of learning of their own aims. Instructors should model how to honor students of color experiences and learning trajectory with critical and thoughtful engagement. CRT and whiteness study recommendations, devise activities that interrogate how racial identities are constructed in social spaces on the campus, classroom, clubs, the gym, sports facilities, and the academy in general. Avoid power struggles, discrimination, Olympics, white versus black. Let go of the desire to know the other. Comprehension is not always attainable. Recognize the limitation of one's knowing. Post-structural lesson. Social identities in the classroom are not neatly defined and packaged. Create a classroom space for understanding the meaning of experiences for a student of color. Create safe places for them. Anti-racism beyond the classroom. Institutions should be broaden professional, experimental, academic opportunities for students of color, internships, study abroad, job shadowing, fellowships. Black-only spaces as safe places. And these are suggested readings if you're interested in finding out more information. They have the list for critical race theory, they have a list for whiteness studies, and they have a list for anti-racist pedagogy. And those were the reasons why the pro side thinks that they should not be banned. Now we're going to go look at the con side. Con, critical race theory. Those who are CRT scholars subscribe to a number of tenets that Delgado and Stefanik in 2001 identified as the hallmarks of CRT. 1, belief that racism is normal or ordinary and not abhorrent in the United States society. 2, interest convergence or material determination. 3, race is a social construct. 4, intersectionality and anti-essentialism. And 5, voice or counter narrative. But is this what they are really doing? Here we see a group of people trying to put a bunch of people together, and they're saying unity in the ballot box. Look at the tenets of CRT. Racism is normal is their tenet. This is what they say. What do critical race theorists believe? First, that racism is ordinary, not aberrational. Normal science, the usual way science society does business, the common everyday experience of most people of color in this country. Delgado and Stefanik, 2001. But really, here's a picture from CNN on the special that they did talking about young kids playing with each other at school. You'll notice that left up to their own, normally race doesn't make a big difference in play when you have groups of people together. They just want to play, they play. Interest convergence. Martin Luther King Jr., I Had a Dream, 1963 speech on the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation speech. The interest convergence says, most racial remedies, however, when measured by their actual potential, will prove more symbolic than substantive value to blacks. This is Bell, 1992. Basically, he would say that any rights that were obtained by blacks under this system were given by the whites for the benefit of the whites. Now, here is a gentleman in a speech. I Had a Dream speech was given in Washington, D.C., again, like I said, on the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation back in 1963. And I quote, Martin Luther King Jr. said, I had a dream that my 4 children one day will live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. Notice that this goes entirely different against interest convergence. In this case, the con side will argue that here you have a very influential African-American person asking not to be judged by the color of their skin, but being judged by the content of their character, which is totally opposite of what the pro side is trying to say in today's debate. They're saying that you should just be judged by the color of your skin. If the truth is not on your side, no problem, change the truth. This is their voice and counter-narrative projection. In the mid-60s, Archie Shepp took his fundamentally critical tenor saxophone and stepped outside of the commercially laden mainstream musical community of assumption and voiced his dissent beyond the ways it could be tolerated within the constraints of conventional jazz. 25 years later or so, some legal scholars of color are voicing dissent from many of the law's underlying assumptions. Storytelling becomes history, and dissent against it is not allowed. One of the things that Kahn will bring out, or tried to bring out, or should bring out, you'll put it this way, is that this idea of storytelling becoming history is basically you change the evidence as you go. So if the facts don't fit your story, you're going to change your story to make it become apparently sin. Here we see Jack Nicholson in A Few Good Men when he's on the witness stand and he's being cross-examined, and he comes up with these famous quotes. You want answers? The truth? You want the truth? You can't handle the truth. And the problem may be is what the Kahn will probably try to bring out in this argument is that there are many more factors in which we're not ready to stand up for. Race is always is a made-up thing. In the tenets of that we saw earlier, the Kahn will bring out that race, the Pro will bring out that race is a social construct. Race has been a constructed element of organizational principles as a praxis and structure, and has that has constructed and reconstructed the world society since the emergence of modernity. The enormous historical shift represented by the rise of Europe, the founding of modern nation states and empires, and the conquista of the onset of African slavery and the subjugation of much of Asia. Wynant, 2001. If true, then they took out their own argument. Their argument says that there is no such thing as race, and we construct race by what people look like. Now, the reason why they would take out their own argument from a logic standpoint is twofold. Number one is that they pretty much admit that race is not a physical phenomenon. It's more of a mental or a psychological phenomenon. And if that's the case, then you're creating a prison, or you're creating a condition in which that person can never escape. And at that point, this is a really bad situation. In other words, many people will come to the United States, immigrants for many generations have come to the United States to live, quote, the American dream. And the American dream was, if you work hard, that you could make something yourself, and you can make something for a life for your children. America has been full of immigrants since the beginning of time. When you say that, you say, well, the native indigenous people that were here before the people settled here, the European people settled here in the United States, were actually migrants from different areas too. So everybody that came to our part of the world were from another part. You're about to do an experiment. I'm asking everyone here to do an experiment. You will look at the following pictures and decide what they all have in common. Here you see two pictures. One is President of the United States, Barack Obama, and the second picture is Sir Winston Churchill, who was the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. What do they have in common with these other people? Next to, you see George Herbert Walker Bush, President of the United States, 41st President. And then you see President George W. Bush, President number 43. What do they have in common with Barack Obama and Winston Churchill? Here you see a picture of former Senator John Kerry, former Secretary of State John Kerry. Now he's Energy Czar John Kerry from Massachusetts. And then here you see a picture of Queen Elizabeth II shortly after she was crowned queen back in the 1950s. What do they have in, what do these two people have in common with George W. Bush, George Herbert Walker Bush, Barack Obama, and Winston Churchill? Here you see former Vice President Dick Cheney, and then you see Lady Diana Spencer. Okay, what do they have in common with Barack Obama, Winston Churchill, George Herbert Walker Bush, George Bush, John Kerry, Queen Elizabeth II, and finally, you see a picture of Michael Cunningham and Tom Hanks. What do all these people have in common? In essence, we can show that CRT is racist by trying to keep the truth of our interrelationships from us, by trying to deny a common heritage and pit one group of people against another group of people that is meant to control people, not to uplift or improve people. CRT promotes group identity and makes us look at the surface, not at what we really are or where we really came from. Remember these words. Martin Luther King Jr., 1963, Washington, D.C. I have a dream that my 4 children one day will live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. What did they all have in common? All the people you saw had a common ancestry. They had relatives from Armenia, Georgia, Persia, India, China, Korea, and many more other countries. Although they look different at the picture today, they had a common past in which they all had the same relatives. In other words, they were all distant cousins of some sort. Now, what CRT would tell you is that you won't go back to see that they had a common relationship. You would judge each person individually, which doesn't really make much sense when you take a look on the con side. At least they'll say that. Yet by looking at them in the pictures, they do not look alike. They came from these countries. They don't look like what they came from these countries today, but their ancestors did. They share a solid past together, and not that terribly long ago. Dick Cheney, Barack Obama, John Kerry are all within 8 or 9 generations, George W. Bush. The con will say, would we be racist today if we were taught that we were actually, in many cases, descendants of some of the same races we are now complaining about? The con's main point is going to be there is only one race, and that's the human race. And if taught properly, you could talk about different colors of skin and different things like that. People look differently. But if we go back and actually check our DNA, or we check our genealogy, we will find out that we are all so closely related that it makes very little sense to have these type of programs to spread hate where you're actually really self-loathing or hating yourself. Now you've seen both sides. Next, you will watch Two Schools Debate. You'll be watching for a discussion of this topic. After the debate, we will come back on the air live, or if you're watching this on Flipgrid asynchronously, after you watch the debate, I would like to get your opinion, not on necessarily who won the debate, because the goal here is not who won or lost. The goal is, what is your opinion? How has it changed? And what do you really think about race, not only in the world, but maybe in your country, and how it impacts that, okay? So have a very good session. We'll be back on in approximately about an hour, 45 minutes. And we'd love to see that your reflections on this. For the people that are going to do this asynchronously because they can't do this, we'll have Flipgrids up for you. Please put you have up to 10 minutes to to give responses, please give responses. And we appreciate it. Thank you so much and have a very great day.